Chapter 3. Tim woke before sunrise. For several long seconds, he lay perfectly still inside his sleeping bag, staring at the faint outline of the tent ceiling. Something felt wrong. Not fear. Not danger. Just different. Then he realized what it was. Silence. Complete silence. No birds welcomed the coming dawn. No squirrels rustled through fallen pine needles. No woodpecker hammered against a distant tree. Not even the breeze whispered through the branches. Tim frowned. The mountains were never this quiet. Every morning since they'd arrived had begun with birds singing from every direction. Now, nothing. He quietly unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The cool morning air carried the scent of pine and damp earth. A thin layer of mist drifted across the lake. The surrounding forest stood perfectly still beneath the pale light of dawn. It wasn't peaceful. It felt empty. A soft crunch behind him broke the silence. Odin. The German shepherd walked over and leaned gently against Tim's leg before looking toward the dark tree line. Morning, buddy. Odin didn't wag his tail. He simply watched the forest. Tim followed his gaze. Nothing moved. No birds fluttered between branches. No chipmunks darted across fallen logs. No deer grazed near the edge of camp. Just endless rows of silent pines fading into the mist. Weird. He muttered. Maybe everything's sleeping in. He wasn't convinced. Still, there wasn't much else to make of it. Tim gathered a handful of kindling and built one last morning fire. The crackling flames seemed unusually loud in the stillness. Coffee? Helena called sleepily from inside the tent. Already started. You're the best. I keep telling people that. She laughed softly. One by one, the rest of the family emerged. Timmy stumbled into the morning wearing yesterday's sweatshirt, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Morning. Morning. Lily shuffled out wrapped in a blanket, clutching her dragon-shaped piece of driftwood like a treasured souvenir. She yawned dramatically. Can we stay one more day? Tim smiled. I wish we could. But tomorrow we'd all be wishing we had one more vacation day. She sighed. Vacation should last forever. If it did, it wouldn't feel special anymore. She thought about that while accepting a mug of hot chocolate. I guess. Breakfast was simple. The last of the bacon sizzled in the cast-iron skillet. Scrambled eggs cooked beside it. Slices of bread toasted over the fire. Everyone ate quietly, enjoying the cool mountain morning. Tim looked around the campground. It had changed again. More campsites sat empty. Several RVs were already pulling onto the campground road. Families packed coolers and folded tents with surprising urgency. Looks like everybody had the same idea. Helena observed. Beat the traffic. Probably. Tim nodded. Holiday weekends always ended with everyone heading home at once. Still, he couldn't remember seeing a campground empty quite this quickly. As breakfast ended, everyone slipped naturally into the routine of breaking camp. Tim and Timmy lowered the family tent. They worked together in practiced silence, folding poles and rolling canvas into its storage bag. Lily carefully packed her collection of treasures. Smooth stones from the lake. Feathers. Pine cones. The dragon-shaped driftwood found a place of honor on top. Don't crush him, she warned. Tim smiled. We'll protect the dragon. Promise? Promise. Helena moved methodically around the campsite. She checked beneath the picnic table. Inside the fire ring. Around every tree they'd tied gear to. No trace left behind. Exactly how they always camped. When everything was finally packed, Tim stood for a moment beside the empty campsite. 3 days ago it had been full of excitement. Now only flattened grass marked where their tent had stood. "Ready?" Helena asked. "Ready." The truck rolled slowly toward the campground exit. As they approached the office, the campground host stepped outside carrying his clipboard. "Morning, folks." "Morning. Heading home?" "Afraid so. Hope you enjoyed yourselves." "We did. Beautiful place." "Glad to hear it." The older man hesitated for just a second. "Drive carefully. Roads have been a little unusual." Tim raised an eyebrow. "Holiday traffic?" "Something like that." The host forced a tired smile. "Just take your time getting home." "Will do. Thanks again." The man waved as the truck pulled away. Tim glanced in the rearview mirror. The campground host remained standing outside the office, watching each departing vehicle disappear down the road. Probably making sure everyone checked out. Nothing more than that. The winding mountain road climbed steadily away from the lake. Each turn offered one final glimpse of the sparkling water below. "Bye, lake," Lily whispered from the back seat. "See you next year." Tim smiled. "Absolutely." The mountains slowly slipped behind them. Towering pines gave way to rolling hills. Eventually the narrow campground road joined the state highway leading towards Spokane. Tim eased onto the pavement. He immediately noticed something. There should have been more traffic. Holiday weekends usually filled this road with campers towing trailers, boats, and RVs. Instead, only a handful of vehicles traveled in either direction. Tim glanced at Helena. "Feels quieter than usual." She looked down the nearly empty highway. "You're right. Maybe we got out early." Maybe. It was the simplest explanation. The one Tim chose to believe. The truck continued south beneath a bright summer sky. Home was only a few hours away. None of them realized that while they had spent 3 peaceful days in the mountains, the world they were returning to had quietly begun to fall apart. The highway wound through the mountains in long, gentle curves. Morning sunlight filtered through towering pines, casting moving shadows across the pavement. Tim settled into a comfortable speed. The truck hummed steadily beneath him. For several miles, no one spoke. Lily had already drifted back to sleep against the window, her dragon-shaped piece of driftwood resting safely in her lap. Timmy wore headphones around his neck, quietly watching the scenery pass. Helena sipped from her travel mug. "It's pretty." Tim nodded. Hard to beat this drive. The mountains slowly gave way to rolling hills. More vehicles should have begun appearing by now. Campers. Motorcycles. Boats heading home after the weekend. Instead, the road remained strangely empty. A pickup pulling a fishing boat passed in the opposite direction. Then nothing. Nearly 5 minutes slipped by before another vehicle appeared. Tim frowned. "This is weird." Helena looked up from the map she'd been studying. "What is?" "Usually this road's packed after a holiday weekend. Especially this time of morning. Maybe everyone left yesterday." Maybe. It was possible. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the highway felt abandoned. A green highway sign announced a scenic overlook 1 mile ahead. Tim smiled. "One last stop?" Lily's eyes opened immediately. "Yes." Timmy looked over from the passenger seat. "Bathroom break sounds good." "Works for me." The truck eased into the overlook parking area. Tim expected dozens of vehicles. Instead, only 3 occupied the large parking lot. A family minivan. An older pickup. A motorcycle parked near the far railing. "That's it?" Timmy asked. Kind of surprising, Tim admitted. The overlook itself was breathtaking. Mountain ridges stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Morning sunlight illuminated the valleys below. Normally the viewing platform buzzed with tourists taking pictures. Today, only an elderly couple stood quietly looking west. Tim leaned against the railing. Never gets old. Helena slipped an arm around his waist. No, it doesn't. Lily hurried to the coin-operated binoculars. Dad, come look. He joined her. What did you find? Way out there. She pointed toward the distant horizon. I think I see smoke. Tim adjusted the binoculars. Far beyond several mountain ridges, a dark gray column climbed into the sky. Not enormous, but unmistakable. Probably a wildfire, Helena suggested. Could be. Though, he didn't remember hearing about any fires. Maybe lightning. Maybe someone ignored a campfire ban. There were plenty of possibilities. Tim handed the binoculars back to Lily. See anything else? Just mountains. Good enough for me. As they returned toward the truck, the elderly man they'd noticed earlier approached. Beautiful morning. Sure is, Tim replied. Heading toward Spokane? That's the plan. The older man nodded slowly. Road's been quiet. Too quiet. Tim smiled politely. We were just saying the same thing. His wife folded a road map and tucked it into her purse. We stopped for breakfast back in Colville. Restaurant was nearly empty. On a holiday morning. Never seen that before. Maybe everybody's sleeping in, Tim offered. Maybe. The woman smiled, though she didn't sound convinced. Safe travels. You too. The couple climbed into their pickup and drove away. Tim watched them disappear down the highway. Funny. What's funny? Helena asked. Everybody keeps mentioning how quiet everything is. Guess we're not imagining it. She looked around the nearly empty parking lot. No. I don't think we are. Back on the highway, the silence continued. The truck passed a campground entrance. Its gates stood open. Only a handful of RVs remained. Another mile brought a roadside diner. The parking lot was almost empty. A gas station appeared shortly afterward. Only one vehicle sat at the pumps. Holiday weekends usually meant lines stretching into the street. Tim slowed slightly as they passed. Where is everybody? Timmy wondered aloud. Home already? Maybe, Tim answered, though his voice carried less confidence than before. A pair of ambulances suddenly raced past in the opposite direction. Lights flashing. Sirens screaming. They disappeared around the next bend almost as quickly as they'd appeared. Everyone watched them go. Hope everybody's okay, Helena said quietly. Car accident, Tim replied. Has to be. A few minutes later, another emergency vehicle passed. Then another. This time a sheriff's SUV. Lights flashing. No siren. Heading north. Toward the mountains. That's several now, Timmy observed. Holiday weekends usually mean more accidents, Tim answered. People drive tired. Drive too fast. Helena nodded. Unfortunately, he's right. The explanation fit. It always seemed to. Another 20 minutes passed. The scenery gradually changed from dense forest to open farmland. Traffic increased slightly, but not by much. Then the truck's radio crackled. Static. A burst of voices. Then more static. Tim reached for the volume knob. Thought we lost reception. The speaker hissed loudly before a calm voice briefly emerged. State officials are advising. Static swallowed the sentence. Remain where? More static. Additional emergency resources. Silence. The station disappeared completely. Tim frowned. That was odd. Probably between towers. Helena said. Maybe. He pressed the seek button. Country music. Another station. Nothing unusual. He shrugged. Reception's always terrible through the mountains. Timmy leaned his head against the window. Guess we'll hear the news once we're closer to town. Probably. Tim said. Outside, another thin ribbon of smoke rose on the western horizon. This one was farther away. Barely visible against the bright blue sky. Tim noticed it. Then another. Small. Distant. Easy to dismiss. Forest fires. He thought. Must be. He rolled on toward Spokane. Still believing there was a perfectly ordinary explanation waiting just a few miles down the road. The farther south they drove, the more familiar the landscape became. The towering mountains slowly gave way to rolling farmland. Open fields stretched toward the horizon. Small towns appeared every 20 or 30 miles before fading behind them once again. Normally, this stretch of highway felt alive. Travelers stopped for coffee. Families filled diners. Pickup trucks crowded the gas pumps. Today, everything seemed muted. Tim glanced at the fuel gauge. Just under half a tank. I'd still like to top off. Helena nodded. Never hurts before getting closer to the city. There's a station coming up. Tim recognized the exit immediately. They'd stopped there almost every year after camping. Cheap gas. Clean bathrooms. Fresh cinnamon rolls that Lily insisted were the best in the state. The truck exited the highway and rolled toward the familiar intersection. Tim frowned. That's odd. The gas station sat dark. Every pump was covered with bright yellow plastic bags. The convenience store windows were dark. A handwritten sign hung crookedly on the front door. Closed. Tim slowed to a stop. That's never happened before. Helena looked around. Maybe the power's out. Could be. There were no utility trucks. No workers. No customers. Just an empty parking lot. A sheriff's cruiser sat across the street outside a small grocery store. The deputy leaned against his vehicle talking with several frustrated people. Tim cracked his window. One of the men shook his head. They're saying the deliveries never came. The deputy spread his hands. That's all I've been told. Another woman spoke up. We've been trying to call family in Spokane since yesterday. Phones barely work. The deputy nodded sympathetically. Keep trying. That's all anyone can do right now. Tim looked toward Helena. Supply truck delayed? Maybe. Holiday weekend. Things get backed up. He wanted to believe it. A pickup pulled into the gas station behind them. The driver climbed out, stared at the covered pumps, then sighed loudly. Seriously? He walked toward Tim's truck. You know what's going on? No idea. Been stopping here for years. Never seen it closed. The man scratched his beard. I've hit 2 stations already. Both closed. Tim blinked. 2? Yeah. Thought maybe I was just unlucky. He laughed weakly. Guess not. Well. Good luck. You too. The man climbed back into his pickup and drove away. Tim glanced once more at the fuel gauge. Still enough to reach Spokane. Should we keep going? Helena asked. Yeah. No point sitting here. As they pulled back onto the highway, Lily looked out the window. No cinnamon rolls? Afraid not. Ah. Next trip. She accepted the answer with a disappointed nod before returning to looking out the window. The next town arrived 20 minutes later. Tim spotted another gas station near the highway. This one was open. Sort of. Cars filled every pump. A line of vehicles stretched into the parking lot. People stood outside their cars watching the pumps impatiently. That's not normal, Tim muttered. Holiday traffic? Helena suggested. Maybe. Though holiday traffic usually meant people buying snacks. Not waiting in lines just to reach a pump. Tim decided against stopping. We've still got enough. Let's save ourselves the wait. Works for me. They continued through town. Several storefronts were unexpectedly closed despite the middle of the morning. A pharmacy. A hardware store. Even the small diner looked empty. Tim slowed at a red light. A television mounted inside an electronics store caught his eye through the display window. Every screen showed the same image. A woman standing behind a news desk. Across the bottom of every television, a bright red banner scrolled continuously. State of emergency declared. The light turned green before Tim could read anything else. Did you see the TVs? Helena nodded. Yeah. Wonder what happened. Wildfires? Tim guessed. Maybe. Though a statewide emergency seemed excessive. Tim reached for the radio. Static. Country music. Static again. Another station finally came through. Governor asking residents to remain calm. The voice faded. Avoid unnecessary. Static swallowed the rest. He tapped the dashboard. Come on. Nothing. Reception disappeared again. Tim sighed. We'll probably get a clear station closer to Spokane. Hopefully. The highway widened as they approached larger communities. Traffic increased. But something still felt off. Cars traveled with unusual purpose. Nobody lingered in scenic pullouts. Nobody towed campers anymore. Several vehicles carried hastily packed belongings strapped to their roofs. Tim noticed one SUV piled so high with luggage that blankets flapped in the wind behind it. Moving day? Timmy wondered. Maybe. Though it seemed strange to see several vehicles packed the same way. A few miles later, another ambulance screamed past heading north. Then a fire engine. Then two sheriff's SUVs. All with lights flashing. No one in the truck spoke. Tim tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Something's definitely going on. Helena looked ahead through the windshield. Yeah. I just wish someone would tell us what. Neither of them had an answer. The highway stretched endlessly before them. Somewhere ahead. Spokane waited. And with every passing mile, the ordinary explanations were becoming harder to believe. The truck kept to southern route. The familiar landscape should have been comforting. Barns. Farms. Open fields swaying gently in the summer breeze. Normally, this stretch of road marked the beginning of the final leg home. Today, it felt as though the world had quietly stepped out of rhythm. Tim glanced at the clock. Almost noon. We should be home in a couple hours. Assuming traffic behaves. Helena smiled. You're already thinking about your own shower, aren't you? Maybe. Real bed. Real coffee. Air conditioning. I was trying to sound less selfish. She laughed. I knew exactly where you were going. Timmy looked up from the road. I'm just looking forward to seeing Odin sprint through the backyard. The German shepherd lifted one ear at the sound of his name. Lily smiled. I bet he misses home too. Odin answered with a lazy thump of his tail. The moment felt wonderfully ordinary. Then the radio crackled. Static hissed through the speakers. Tim instinctively reached for the volume knob. Maybe we'll finally get the news. The static faded just enough for a calm voice to emerge. Emergency alert system. The entire family looked toward the dashboard. This message is being transmitted at the request of Washington State Emergency Management. The signal faded. Static swallowed several words before returning. Residents are advised to remain. More static. Tim adjusted the tuner. Come on. The voice returned. Avoid unnecessary travel. Helena frowned. That's odd. The broadcast crackled again. Hospitals in several counties are experiencing static. Law enforcement requests. Nothing. Tim tapped the dashboard. Don't lose it now. The signal returned one final time. If you are in a safe location, remain there until further notice. The radio erupted into loud static. Then silence. A country music station suddenly faded in as though nothing had happened. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Remain where? Timmy finally asked. No idea. Helena stared out the windshield. Hospitals. Law enforcement. State of emergency. That doesn't sound like wildfires anymore. Tim nodded slowly. No. It doesn't. Could be a chemical spill. Maybe. Big accident. Train derailment. Natural disaster. There were plenty of possibilities. None of them felt quite right. Lily looked between her parents. Are we okay? Tim smiled reassuringly in the rearview mirror. Of course we are. Whatever's happening. We're a long way from it. She accepted the answer without another question. Tim wished he believed it as completely as she did. A highway information sign appeared ahead. Normally it displayed road conditions or amber alerts. Today the electronic message slowly scrolled across the bright orange display. Avoid unnecessary travel. The message repeated. Then disappeared. Tim drove beneath it without speaking. Helena finally broke the silence. That's the same thing the radio said. Yeah. Which means whatever's going on. It's serious enough they're putting it on road signs. Tim exhaled slowly. Still doesn't explain what happened. Traffic began increasing. Not dramatically. Just enough that they occasionally caught up to other vehicles. Most people drove several miles per hour over the speed limit. No one seemed interested in sightseeing. No one lingered. Everyone appeared to be trying to get somewhere. Fast. Another sheriff's SUV passed heading north. Then another. A state patrol cruiser followed behind them. Lights flashing. No sirens. Tim had lost count of how many emergency vehicles they'd seen. Lily looked out her window. Why are there so many police cars? Tim answered without taking his eyes off the road. Something big must have happened. Hopefully they're helping people. I'm sure they are. He wanted those words to be true. A rest area appeared ahead. Normally packed on holiday weekends. Today, only 4 vehicles occupied the entire parking lot. Every picnic table sat empty. The playground stood deserted. Even the vending machines looked untouched. That's creepy. Timmy muttered. I've never seen it empty. Neither have I. Helena admitted. Tim continued driving. No reason to stop. They had food. Water. A full cooler. The sooner they got home, the better. A few miles later, another radio station briefly cut through the static. National Guard units are being. The signal disappeared. Citizens should avoid. Static. Repeat. Nothing. Tim sighed. It's like listening through a blender. Reception's getting worse. Helena observed. Or somebody's interrupting the broadcasts. He hadn't considered that. The thought lingered. Neither of them said it aloud. The truck crested a gentle hill. Far ahead, a faint gray haze hung over the horizon. At first Tim thought it was heat shimmer. Then he realized it wasn't moving. Smoke. Not one column. Several. Too distant to identify. Too widespread to ignore. Helena noticed them too. That's Spokane, isn't it? Tim stared ahead. He couldn't answer immediately. Finally. I think so. No one spoke again. The truck continued toward the city. Toward the growing haze. Toward home. Whatever waited there. It was no longer something happening somewhere else. It was directly ahead. The haze on the horizon never disappeared. If anything, it slowly grew darker. Tim rested both hands on the steering wheel. The highway had widened to 4 lanes now, carrying a steady stream of vehicles towards Spokane. Traffic was heavier than it had been all morning. Still, it wasn't the bumper-to-bumper congestion he expected after a holiday weekend. Everyone seemed to be moving with purpose. No one lingered in the passing lane. No one slowed to admire the scenery. No motorcycles cruised between cars. No families towed campers back toward the mountains. It felt less like people were returning from vacation. And more like they were trying to get somewhere before it was too late. Helena looked out her window. Something's definitely changed. Tim nodded. Yeah. I just wish we knew what. A pickup sat abandoned on the shoulder. Its driver's door stood open. No one was nearby. Flat tire? Timmy guessed. Maybe. Tim answered. Though he noticed there wasn't a jack beside the truck. No spare tire lying on the pavement. No one walking along the shoulder. Just an empty vehicle. A mile later they passed another. This one rested against the guardrail with its hazard lights blinking. The engine wasn't running. No one stood nearby. Strange. Helena murmured. Tim said nothing. Another few miles passed. An SUV sat in the median. Its windshield was shattered. The airbags hung limp inside. A state patrol cruiser blocked the inside lane while an officer directed traffic around it. No ambulance. No tow truck. Just the lone officer. Traffic slowed briefly before returning to highway speed. Everybody okay? Lily asked quietly. I hope so. Tim replied. The answer felt inadequate. The farther they drove, the more emergency vehicles they encountered. Sheriff's deputies. State patrol. Fire engines. Ambulances. Some heading toward Spokane. Others racing away from it. None used their sirens anymore. Only flashing lights reflected across passing cars. Tim reached for the radio again. Still mostly static. Finally, a local station broke through. Authorities continue asking residents to remain calm. The signal crackled. Please do not overwhelm. More static. Information will be provided. Gone. Tim shut the radio off. Not helping much. No. Helena agreed. It's almost worse. You hear just enough to worry. The highway crossed a broad river. Normally fishermen lined the banks during summer weekends. Today, not a single boat floated on the water. No one stood along the shore. Even the public boat launch sat empty. Tim noticed it immediately. Where is everybody? Helena didn't answer. She had noticed the same thing. A minivan merged onto the highway ahead of them. Every inch of its roof was covered with luggage tied beneath blue tarps. Bicycles hung from the rear. A mattress was strapped to the top. The back window was completely blocked by boxes. Looks like they're moving, Timmy said. Maybe, Tim replied. But why during a holiday weekend? The van accelerated well above the speed limit before disappearing into traffic. A few minutes later they passed another overloaded vehicle. Then another. None carried moving company logos. None towed trailers. Just families with far more belongings than seemed reasonable for a weekend trip. Tim's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. He didn't like it. Not one bit. An electronic highway sign came into view. Its amber letters flashed across the screen. Expect delays ahead. The message changed. Use caution. Then repeated. No explanation. No accident warning. No construction notice. Just those two messages. Helena read them aloud. Delays from what? Wish I knew. Traffic slowed. Not stopped. Just slowed. Drivers instinctively lifted off their accelerators. Brake lights rippled through the lanes. Tim eased back with everyone else. What's up there? Timmy leaned forward. Can't tell yet. The line of vehicles rounded a long curve. A tow truck slowly loaded a badly damaged sedan onto its flatbed. The front end had been crushed. Glass glittered across the shoulder. Another wreck, Helena said softly. Tim nodded. Only. Something bothered him. The driver's side door hung wide open. The passenger door too. No one stood nearby. No police officer filled out paperwork. No paramedics treated anyone. Just the tow operator quietly securing the vehicle before pulling away. As traffic picked up speed again, Tim glanced in the mirror. The wreck disappeared behind them. You know, he said after several minutes. I've seen more abandoned cars today than I have in the last 5 years. Helena looked over. You're right. And nobody seems to be around them. Exactly. Neither offered another explanation. Because neither had one. The first suburbs of Spokane were still miles away. Yet signs of civilization were becoming more frequent. Shopping centers. Warehouses. Industrial buildings. Normally these roads bustled with activity. Today many parking lots looked strangely empty. Others were overflowing. There didn't seem to be any pattern. A grocery store parking lot was packed. The hardware store next door sat almost deserted. The pharmacy had cars circling its lot looking for spaces. Across the street, a furniture store looked abandoned. People aren't shopping normally, Helena observed. No. They're looking for something. Tim wasn't sure how he knew that. He simply felt it. The truck continued south. The smoke ahead had grown noticeably thicker now. Instead of isolated columns, a gray blanket hung above the city. Sunlight filtered through it, giving the horizon a dull, muted glow. Tim swallowed. Home was getting closer. For the first time since leaving the campground. He found himself wishing the drive would take a little longer. The first signs welcoming travelers to Spokane appeared along the highway. Tim had driven this route hundreds of times. Every exit. Every overpass. Every familiar landmark usually brought a sense of relief. Almost home. Today. Each mile seemed to tighten the knot in his stomach. The haze ahead had become a blanket of smoke stretching across the horizon. It wasn't thick enough to hide the city. But it dulled the summer sky, turning the bright blue into a washed-out gray. Helena lowered her window an inch. A faint smell drifted inside. Smoke. Tim noticed it too. Not campfire smoke. Not the clean scent of burning pine. This smelled different. A mixture of burned wood, hot asphalt, and something chemical. You smell that? He asked. Helena nodded. Yeah. Lily wrinkled her nose. Something's burning. Probably more than one thing. Tim said quietly. The highway climbed a gentle rise. As they reached the top, Spokane spread out before them. Normally, Tim loved this view. The skyline. The winding river. The neighborhoods stretching across the valley. Instead, thin columns of smoke rose from several different parts of the city. Some were little more than wisps. Others climbed hundreds of feet into the air. I don't remember there being factories over there. Timmy pointed toward one of the larger smoke columns. There aren't. Tim answered. Helena looked at him. House fire? Maybe. He wasn't convincing himself anymore. Not with this many. A helicopter thundered overhead. Everyone instinctively looked up. It wasn't a news helicopter. It flew low and fast toward the center of the city. Moments later, another followed. Then a third. Busy day. Timmy muttered. Too busy. Tim replied. Traffic thickened as more vehicles merged onto the freeway. Most stayed close together. Few people changed lanes. Everyone seemed focused on getting wherever they were going. Then brake lights flared. Hundreds of them. Tim eased off the accelerator. The flow slowed to a crawl. What's going on? Lily asked. Probably congestion. Holiday traffic. Tim answered automatically. But even as he spoke, he knew that wasn't it. Cars weren't merging. They weren't bottlenecking. Drivers simply kept slowing. A sedan rolled past on the shoulder, ignoring the line of traffic. Another followed. Then a pickup. People are getting impatient. Helena said. The truck crept forward. A quarter-mile ahead, flashing lights painted the roadway red and blue. 2 state patrol cruisers blocked the left lane. Several officers stood beside their vehicles, directing traffic into the remaining lanes. Tim couldn't see an accident. No wrecked cars. No construction equipment. Nothing obvious. As they drew closer, one officer waved steadily, keeping vehicles moving. No stopping. No questions. Just keep going. Tim rolled past with his window down. Everything okay, officer? The trooper looked exhausted. Keep moving, sir. Stay on the freeway. That's all he said. No explanation. No reassurance. Just a quick motion to continue. Tim accelerated. Well, that was helpful. Helena stared back through the rear window. He looked like he hadn't slept. Neither of them said anything else. A few exits later, another electronic highway sign flashed above the lanes. Limit travel. The message changed. Expect emergency vehicles. Then repeated. No destination. No instructions. Just another warning without answers. A loud rumble echoed across the valley. Everyone looked west. A large transport helicopter crossed the skyline. It flew much lower than the others. Dark green. Military. Tim watched it disappear toward downtown. Was that Army? Timmy asked. National Guard, maybe. Helena answered. Why would the National Guard be here? No one responded. Because none of them knew. The truck passed another exit. The shopping district beyond should have been crowded. Instead, the parking lots told 2 completely different stories. A home improvement store overflowed with vehicles. People pushed heavily loaded carts through the parking lot. Across the street, a clothing store sat completely empty. The fast food restaurants had lines wrapping around the buildings. The movie theater next door was dark. It's like... Helena began. Everyone's buying necessities. Tim finished. Neither liked what that suggested. They crossed another overpass. Below, city streets were unusually busy. Some intersections were jammed. Others were nearly deserted. A pair of ambulances raced through one intersection without slowing. A fire engine turned the opposite direction moments later. Their sirens echoed between the buildings before fading into the distance. Lily hugged her blanket tighter. Dad? Yeah? Can we just go home now? Tim looked at her in the mirror. That's exactly where we're going. She nodded and settled back into her seat. For the first time all day, he wasn't completely certain that home would still feel like home. Ahead, another ribbon of smoke curled into the gray sky. This one rose from somewhere much closer. Much larger. Tim gripped the steering wheel. Whatever had happened. They were no longer driving toward Rumors. They were driving into the middle of it. Traffic slowed again. This time it didn't gradually ease into a crawl. It stopped. Brake lights stretched as far ahead as Tim could see. He shifted the truck into park and rested his hands on the steering wheel. Well. This can't be good. Helena looked ahead. Can you see anything? Not yet. The line of vehicles crept forward a few feet before stopping again. Drivers began climbing out of their cars. Some stretched their legs. Others walked up the shoulder trying to see what was causing the delay. Tim stayed put. No sense making things worse. After nearly 10 minutes, the truck had moved less than 100 yards. Tim finally rolled down his window. The air smelled stronger now. Smoke lingered over the freeway, carried by a light breeze. It irritated the back of his throat. A man from the SUV beside them stepped out. Any idea what's going on? Tim shook his head. Not a clue. The man looked toward the front of the line. Somebody walking back said it's military. Military? That's what I heard. The man shrugged. Could just be another rumor. Seems like that's all anybody has today. He climbed back into his SUV as traffic lurched forward once more. Tim followed. Another 100 yards. Then another stop. Several minutes later the cause finally came into view. Concrete barriers narrowed the freeway to a single lane. Military trucks lined both sides of the road. Soldiers in camouflage stood behind temporary fencing, rifles slung across their chests. Most looked barely older than Timmy. Their faces were tired. Some watched the traffic. Others spoke quietly into radios. National Guard. Helena whispered. Looks like it. Tim answered. No one in the truck spoke after that. The line crept closer. One vehicle at a time was waved forward. The soldiers weren't searching every car. They simply spoke briefly with each driver before sending them on. 2 Humvees sat with their engines idling. Nearby, a large canvas command tent had been hastily erected in the median. Maps covered folding tables inside. Officers leaned over them, pointing and talking with urgent expressions. A helicopter thundered overhead. Several soldiers instinctively looked up before returning to their work. The truck rolled closer. A young guardsman stepped into the lane and motioned for Tim to stop. He looked exhausted. Dust covered his boots. Dark circles framed his eyes. Afternoon, sir. Afternoon. Where are you headed? Home. Spokane Valley. The soldier nodded. How many in the vehicle? 4. Plus the dog. The soldier glanced inside. Lily gave a shy wave. He managed a tired smile before looking back at Tim. Listen carefully. The freeway is restricted beyond this point. You'll need to take exit 22. Follow local traffic control from there. Is there an accident? Tim asked. The guardsman hesitated. There's ongoing emergency operations. Please avoid downtown if possible. That's all I can tell you. Tim looked toward the rows of military vehicles. Is everything going to be okay? The young man's expression tightened. I honestly don't know, sir. For just a moment. He looked less like a soldier and more like a scared young man trying his best. Then his training returned. Please keep moving. Tim nodded. Thank you. The guardsman stepped aside and waved them through. No one spoke until the checkpoint disappeared behind them. He didn't know. Helena said quietly. No. Tim answered. He really didn't. Traffic remained slow. Another mile passed before orange barrels began guiding vehicles toward an exit ramp. Electronic signs flashed overhead. Freeway closed ahead. Exit required. Drivers merged without honking. Without shouting. Everyone seemed too tired. Or too worried. As Tim guided the truck down the ramp, he noticed another line of military vehicles entering the freeway from the opposite direction. Flatbed trucks. Fuel tankers. Ambulances. More Humvees than he could quickly count. They're bringing in a lot of people. Timmy said. Yeah. Tim replied. Either things are really bad. Or they're afraid they're about to get worse. No one challenged the thought. The city streets below were far busier than the freeway had been. Traffic lights blinked normally. Businesses remained open. People hurried in and out carrying bottled water, bags of groceries, and stacks of supplies. Nobody smiled. Nobody lingered to talk. Everyone moved with quiet urgency. A police cruiser sped through the intersection ahead with its lights flashing. It turned sharply and disappeared between rows of buildings. Another followed moments later. Tim took a slow breath. We'll swing around. Take the back roads. Should still get us home. Helena unfolded the road map she'd kept tucked in the door pocket. There's a route through the valley. Adds maybe 20 minutes. Better than sitting in traffic. Tim nodded. Let's do that. He turned onto a familiar arterial road. For a brief moment, the neighborhood almost looked normal. Children played in a front yard. A man watered his lawn. A woman pushed a stroller down the sidewalk. Then they passed a grocery store. The parking lot overflowed with cars. People hurried out carrying overflowing carts. Several shelves visible through the front windows looked completely empty. The ordinary world was still there. But it was beginning to crack. And with every turn toward home, those cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. Tim followed the stream of traffic off the freeway and onto the city streets. Normally, he avoided surface roads whenever possible. Too many stoplights. Too many intersections. Too many impatient drivers. Today, they were the only way home. The road wound through familiar neighborhoods. Tree-lined streets. Small parks. Schools sitting quiet in the summer heat. Everything looked almost normal. Almost. The first gas station they passed was overflowing. Cars wrapped around the building and spilled onto the street. Several drivers stood beside their vehicles, arms crossed, staring impatiently toward the pumps. A police cruiser idled near the entrance. Its lights flashed silently. Nobody appeared to be getting arrested. The officer simply watched the growing crowd. Looks like everyone had the same idea. Helena said. Fill up before whatever's happening gets worse. Tim nodded. Glad we stopped before leaving town. Neither of them mentioned that they hadn't actually filled the tank. There hadn't been an opportunity. The gauge still sat just above half. Enough for now, he hoped. Another few blocks brought them past a grocery store. The parking lot was packed. People pushed shopping carts piled high with bottled water, canned food, diapers, and pet food. Several employees struggled to gather abandoned carts scattered across the lot. A delivery truck sat backed up to the loading dock. Workers unloaded pallets as fast as they could. Looks like they're restocking, Timmy observed. Trying to, Helena replied. They're getting cleaned out. A woman hurried across the parking lot carrying 2 cases of bottled water. Another man wrestled a 50-pound bag of dog food into the back of his SUV. Nobody looked relaxed. Nobody smiled. Everyone moved with quiet urgency. The next intersection brought another surprise. The pharmacy drive-thru wrapped completely around the building. Cars waited 3 deep in every lane. Tim noticed people standing outside the entrance as well. Some shaded their eyes from the afternoon sun. Others paced while looking repeatedly at their phones. Still no signal? Helena asked, checking her own. Nothing. She sighed and tucked it away. I've been trying to call Mom since this morning. Straight to voicemail every time. Tim glanced at her. We'll be home soon. Landline might still work. Hopefully. Traffic slowed again. This time because of an intersection without functioning traffic lights. The signals hung dark. Police officers directed vehicles through one group at a time. Power outage? Lily asked. Maybe just this area. Tim answered. As they crossed the intersection, he noticed utility crews parked nearby. Workers stood around their trucks talking instead of repairing anything. One pointed toward the west. Another simply shook his head. Nobody seemed certain what they were supposed to be doing. The truck continued deeper into Spokane Valley. Sirens echoed somewhere nearby. Then another. Then another. They never seemed to stop. Sometimes close. Sometimes distant. Always present. It reminded Tim of listening to waves at the beach. A constant background noise. Only these waves were made of police cars and ambulances. The road curved past a neighborhood park. The playground stood empty despite the warm afternoon. Usually it would be full of children during summer break. Today, only the swings moved gently in the breeze. That's strange. Lily whispered. Where is everybody? Tim looked toward the empty playground. Probably inside. Too hot to be out. It wasn't especially hot. He knew it. She probably did too. But she accepted the answer. A pickup suddenly pulled out from a side street directly in front of them. Tim hit the brakes. The truck lurched to a stop. Coffee splashed from Helena's travel mug. Easy. Timmy blurted. The pickup accelerated away without so much as a wave. Guess everyone's in a hurry today. Tim muttered. More than usual. Helena replied. At the next intersection, another argument caught Tim's attention. 2 men stood beside their vehicles at a gas station entrance. One pointed angrily toward the pumps. The other threw his hands into the air. A station employee stood between them, trying unsuccessfully to calm both men. A police officer jogged toward the scene from across the street. Tim rolled through the green light before he could hear what they were saying. People are starting to lose their patience, Helena said quietly. Can't really blame them. Nobody knows what's going on. Tim answered. Fear does funny things to people. The streets became more familiar. They were getting close now. Tim recognized the shopping center where they'd bought Lily's bicycle. The pizza place where they celebrated Timmy's middle school graduation. The hardware store where he'd spent far too many Saturdays. Ordinary places. Yet every parking lot told the same story. Crowded. Hurried. Uneasy. The city wasn't panicking. Not yet. But it was preparing for something. Whether anyone understood what that something was, Tim wasn't sure. He turned onto another main road leading toward their neighborhood. The traffic thinned slightly. For the first time in nearly an hour, they were moving close to the speed limit. Home's only a few minutes now, he said. A collective sigh filled the truck. Even Odin lifted his head from the back seat. Everyone was ready to be home. Tim included. He only hoped home still offered the comfort it always had. Behind them, another ambulance screamed through the intersection. Ahead, a plume of dark smoke climbed into the afternoon sky. Closer now. Much closer. Tim couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. Only that it was somewhere between them and home. The streets grew quieter. Not because there were fewer cars. Because fewer people were outside. Tim turned onto a familiar avenue that usually carried him straight toward their neighborhood. Half a mile ahead, orange barricades blocked every lane. Several police cruisers sat across the road with their emergency lights flashing. An officer directed traffic away from the closure. Tim rolled down his window as he approached. "Afternoon, officer. Is this road closed?" The officer looked exhausted. He wore sweat stains beneath his vest, and his eyes were bloodshot. "Yes, sir." "How long?" "Couldn't tell you. You'll need to take Maple and work your way around." "Is there an accident?" The officer hesitated. "Emergency response. That's all I've got." He motioned toward the detour. "Keep moving, please." Tim nodded. "Thank you." The truck merged with the line of vehicles turning onto the side street. "That's the second time today," Helena said. "Military on the freeway. Police here." Tim kept his eyes on the road. Whatever's happening, it's spread across the whole city. Maple Avenue was normally a quiet residential street. Today it carried hundreds of cars trying to bypass the closure. Vehicles crept bumper to bumper beneath rows of mature maple trees. Children's bicycles sat abandoned in front yards. Garden hoses lay across freshly cut lawns. The neighborhood looked perfectly ordinary. Until another helicopter thundered overhead. This one was low enough that the windows rattled. Odin lifted his head immediately. His ears stood straight up. He watched the helicopter until it disappeared behind the rooftops. "Poor guys had enough helicopters," Timmy said. Odin let out a low whine. He still wasn't barking. He hadn't barked all day. That worried Tim more than if he had. The line of traffic finally began moving again. As they approached the next intersection, Tim noticed a city bus sitting at an awkward angle across one lane. Its hazard lights blinked steadily. Passengers stood on the sidewalk nearby. Several carried backpacks and grocery bags. One elderly woman sat on the curb while a younger man offered her a bottle of water. No one looked injured. The driver stood talking to two police officers. "Wonder what happened there," Helena said. "Mechanical problem?" "Maybe," Tim answered. Although the front of the bus looked undamaged. Whatever had stopped it. It hadn't been a collision. The detour wound through another neighborhood before reconnecting with a larger road. Traffic flowed a little faster here. Storefronts lined both sides of the street. Many businesses were still open. But something had changed. Several had handwritten signs taped inside their windows. "Cash only." Others simply read, "No water." Or, "Limit 2 per customer." Tim slowed as they passed a sporting goods store. A line of customers stretched out the front door. Most carried empty shopping carts toward the entrance. Camping gear. Timmy guessed. Probably. Tim replied. People preparing for something. Helena folded her arms. Prepared for what? No one answered. A sharp burst of static erupted from the truck's radio. Without thinking, Tim turned the volume up. Repeat. Avoid contact with. The transmission dissolved into crackling noise. Then another voice cut in. Governor will address the public. Static. Remain calm. Silence. The country music station returned as though nothing had interrupted it. Tim turned the radio off again. I'm getting really tired of hearing half a sentence. You're not the only one. Helena said. A siren wailed somewhere nearby. Then another answered it. The sounds echoed through the neighborhoods, bouncing between buildings until it was impossible to tell where they originated. The city suddenly felt smaller. Every emergency seemed close. Every smoke column seemed just beyond the next block. Tim rounded another corner. Ahead, several people stood outside a convenience store looking up at a television mounted above the checkout counter. Even from the street, he could see a news anchor speaking urgently. Nobody was buying anything. They simply watched. Frozen. Trying to understand. He considered stopping. Maybe they'd finally hear what was happening. Then he looked at Lily. She had fallen asleep again, curled against the window with her blanket tucked beneath her chin. Timmy quietly watched the streets. Helena stared out the windshield. Let's just go home, he said. Helena nodded. Home first. News later. The familiar streets of their neighborhood were only a few miles away now. Tim knew every shortcut. Every back road. Every stop sign. He turned onto the final arterial that would lead them there. The traffic finally thinned. For the first time since leaving the freeway, the truck accelerated smoothly. Almost there, he said softly. Almost. No one noticed the black plume of smoke rising beyond the rooftops ahead. Not yet. But with every mile, it grew larger. Tim turned onto the final stretch of road leading toward their neighborhood. The streets were familiar enough that he could have driven them with his eyes closed. Every intersection held a memory. The elementary school where Lily had her first school play. The park where Timmy learned to ride a bike. The coffee stand where Helena insisted they made the best mochas in Spokane. Home. Only a few minutes away. Yet the closer they came, the less familiar everything felt. The smoke hanging over the city had settled lower. Instead of distant gray columns, a dark haze drifted between buildings. The smell seeped through the truck's ventilation system. Burned wood. Burned plastic. Something metallic. Tim switched the air conditioner to recirculate. That helped a little. Not much. A fire engine roared through the intersection ahead. Seconds later another followed. Then an ambulance. Each headed in a different direction. They don't even seem to be going to the same place, Helena observed. Tim nodded. It's everywhere. They passed a neighborhood grocery store. The parking lot overflowed. Cars were parked along both sides of the street. A handwritten sign taped to the front door read, "No ice." Another read, "No bread." Employees struggled to pull the sliding doors closed as more customers tried to enter. A police officer stood nearby, calmly directing people back. Nobody appeared violent. Just frustrated. Just scared. Tim drove on. The streets became quieter again. Most houses looked perfectly normal. Lawns had been mowed. Sprinklers watered flower beds. American flags fluttered from porches. Yet something was missing. People. No children played outside. No neighbors chatted across fences. Curtains twitched as families watched the street from inside their homes. Everyone seemed to be waiting. For what? No one knew. Odin suddenly stood. His head lifted high above the back seat. His ears locked forward. He let out a low growl. The first one all day. Tim looked into the rearview mirror. Easy, buddy. The dog ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on something outside. Tim slowed instinctively. A man stumbled along the sidewalk ahead. His clothes were dirty. One sleeve was soaked with dried blood. He walked with an awkward limp. Probably hurt. Helena said. Looks like it. Tim answered. The man never looked toward traffic. He simply continued down the sidewalk, disappearing between two houses. You think he needs help? Lily asked. Tim watched him in the mirror until he vanished. Someone probably already called an ambulance. He hoped that was true. He wasn't about to leave his family sitting in the middle of the road to find out. The truck continued forward. Only 2 more turns. Home. A loud pop echoed somewhere nearby. Then another. Tim glanced toward the sound. He knew what it was. Fireworks? Timmy suggested. Maybe. Tim replied monotone. It wasn't a holiday. More pops echoed in the distance. Too irregular to identify. Too far away to investigate. Another helicopter swept overhead. Lower than any before. Its shadow briefly crossed the truck before racing toward downtown. The radio suddenly came alive without warning. The emergency alert system tone filled the cab. Everyone jumped. The familiar electronic beeping gave way to a strained voice. This is an emergency message from Washington State Emergency Management. The signal crackled violently. Residents should shelter. Static. Do not attempt. More static. The transmission broke apart before a final sentence emerged. Emergency services are overwhelmed. Silence. No music followed. Only static. Tim reached over and switched the radio off. No one spoke. The words lingered inside the truck. Emergency services are overwhelmed. Helena stared through the windshield. That's really bad. Tim nodded slowly. Yeah. It is. They rounded another corner. Only a few blocks remained. Then they saw it. Dark smoke billowed upward from somewhere inside their own neighborhood. Not miles away. Not downtown. Close. Too close. Tim instinctively pressed harder on the accelerator. Please don't let that be near our house. Helena whispered. No one answered. Another ambulance raced past them, heading toward the smoke. Its siren echoed off the surrounding homes before fading into the distance. Tim's hands tightened around the steering wheel. Every instinct told him to get his family home. Lock the doors. Figure out what was happening. Whatever was causing this. Whatever emergency had spread across Spokane. It was no longer a distant news story. It had reached their neighborhood. And in just a few more minutes, they were about to discover exactly how much the world had changed.